Bum-ba-da-dum. Howdy, y'all. Banjo Ben here. Today we're learning all about mandolin hammer-ons. You may say, well, what's a hammer-on? Or maybe you've heard that term, but you don't know how to play it. We're going to take care of all that today. It's a big lesson over what we might think is a small topic. However, hammer-ons in your mandolin playing are so very important because I think that hammer-ons may be used on mandolin as much or more than most every other instrument, especially when you get into certain styles of music, really into the fiddle tunes, into the Celtic stuff. Hammer-ons are so very important. So there's the technique side of it to make sure that our hammer-ons are clear and concise, but then there's also some exercises that we're going to run to work all of our fingers so that there's no weak fingers here when it comes to hammer-ons. And then I've got a classic fiddle tune that we're going to do several different versions of using hammer-ons at different parts of the melody. Again, it's just to teach you the whole concept so that you don't have any weak spots. We don't want any weak spots in our playing. If you're watching somewhere besides the website at banjobenclark.com, I'd love to have you come over there. You can become a Gold Pick member and access hundreds of videos for banjo, mandolin, and guitar. Download the tabs, the Jam Track MP3s, all that good stuff. If you are a Gold Pick member, thank you so much. I appreciate your support. Now let's jump right into what hammer-ons are, look at some exercises, and then learn to tune. Let's talk a definition of a hammer-on first of all. Maybe you've heard that word, and it essentially means a way for us to get an extra note out of the mandolin without having to pick a string. So we're using our fret hand to get an extra note. Now, hammer-ons are not the only way to do that. There's other, what I call ornaments that allow us to do that, like slides. So we got two different notes, but only one pick stroke. There are also pull-offs, where we're getting two or more notes with only one stroke of the pick. But when we come to hammer-ons, what we're talking about is playing the string once and then hammering on to another fret, either from open to a fret or a fretted note that's already down to another fretted note. And there are times where you might even hammer on more than once with things like that. Okay, so a hammer-on is going to be a tool that allows us to get more notes out of the mandolin without having to pick it with our pick hand. It's not all about efficiency though, although that's very common. It's also about the sound, because whenever we play a hammer-on, we'll notice that the note that we hammer onto sounds different than if we were to pick it. So there's both of those notes picked and then hammer on. Okay, so there's a softer tone. We miss the pick stroke noise. And so stylistically, there are times when hammer-ons are going to be used because it just sounds better. Slow and fast type of songs, but I use them a lot whenever I'm doing really pretty stuff. But I'll also use them to get more notes than what I might be able to play with my right hand. Fun, fast licks like this. Okay, so that was a combination of pull-offs and hammer-ons, but they're allowing me to get a lot more notes out of the mandolin without having to pick that string each and every time. Okay, let's talk about actual technique. If you play your hammer-ons the same way that you play your normal fretted notes, you're not going to get great tone out of those because we're going to have to exert more force with our fret hand to get clear notes, depending on the sound that you want. So for instance, if we took a line like this, and then if I were to substitute a hammer-on in there for one of those notes, but only fretted it as hard as I normally would, it would sound like this. So we're missing one of those notes. So whenever I hammer on, I'm going to need to put more pressure down, somewhat stab it, press harder. Okay, and you'll get used to doing that automatically without having to think about it. But another thing that helps our hammer-on tone is to remember that we're hammering on from something. So whenever we hammer on to a fret from an open string like this, we have the nut behind us that's holding down that first note. Okay, so we get some pretty good tone. But whenever we hammer on from one fret to the next like this, we've got to hold down that note with our first finger, our anchor finger we might call it, until that hammer-on is fully seated. If we let off early, we're going to get no tone. Okay, so we've got to hold that down and then come in with some more pressure. And I'm going to give you a lot of exercises here in a little while to help strengthen our hands. And I just want to mention that that as you learn to play hammer-ons, you learn to play mandolin, you're going to get stronger with your fret hand, and your hammers are going to get more and more clear with more and more volume the more that you play, because you're able to more succinctly and quickly and with more force put those hammer-ons down. Okay, now one more thing to mention before we dive into the exercises is that hammer-ons happen with all different types of timing. We're going to look at quarter note hammer-ons here in just a little bit. But most of the time whenever we play a mandolin, we're playing eighth notes. So we're using this alternate picking, which we'll talk a lot about here in a moment. And so most of the time our hammer-ons are going to be eighth note hammer-ons. So we need to be careful that whenever we're playing an eighth note hammer-on that we don't try to play it faster than what the picked note would have been. Just because we're playing a hammer-on doesn't mean that it rushes. We don't want to go. Okay, so we're still imagining that we're playing that note in our mind and not rushing. Now there are 16th note hammer-ons that I'm going to use a lot of times to get faster notes. So if we're playing an eighth note run, I may do some hammer-ons that are twice as fast. And that's really common in Celtic styles of music. But most of the time when we're doing a hammer-on, it's not to add more notes in the time, it's just to take the place of a pick stroke. So we just need to keep that in mind. Okay, now that we know all about what hammer-ons are and our technique, let's move into the exercise portion so that I can work out all of your fingers over here and look at every possible scenario. And then we'll learn a little fiddle tune using hammer-ons as well. Let's look at some hammer-on exercises to make sure we really understand it. And we work our way across the mandolin strings and we use all of our fingers. The first exercise I want to use is just a quarter note exercise. The reason why we're doing that is because quarter notes are played with all downstrokes when they happen on the downbeat, right? So just a quick review of alternate picking. Alternate picking means that we play downstrokes on the downbeats, upstrokes on the upbeats. So if you have a 4/4 measure, 1, 2, 3, 4. It has 4 beats in the measure. If you were only playing quarter notes, that's 1 note per beat. They would all be downstrokes. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But when we play eighth notes, we're putting 2 notes per beat. And we catch that second note with an upstroke. And so we'd say 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. For the sake of simplicity, when we're first looking at these hammer-ons, we're going to just look at quarter notes so that we don't have to worry about upstrokes for now. So check out that first line of tab, and I want you to look at the first measure there. Those are the notes that we're going to use in the first exercise. Very simple. And we're going to play every single one of them, and they have downstroke arrows. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now we're going to play that 3 more times in measures 2 through 4, but we're going to substitute a hammer-on for one of our downstrokes. Now the first one there in measure 2, we're going to start with a hammer-on. So we're going to play the open D string, and then we're going to hammer into the 2nd fret with our index finger. And then play the next 2 notes. Can you try that with me? I'm coming down with a lot of force. But think about this too. The slower that you go, the less volume your hammer-ons will have because that sound from the first note is decaying. The energy is decaying, right? So you would get more, if you played it faster, you get more volume. Okay. Measure 3. Now we're going to practice hammering on from index to middle. Remember to leave your index finger down as you hammer into your middle. Play that with me. Very good. How about the last one? We're going to hammer from middle to ring. A little bit tougher with ring finger, isn't it? We're not as strong there. Now we'll get into pinky here in a little while, but it's not as common for us to hammer on with the pinky. Doesn't mean we ignore it. but we'll solo it out here in a little bit. Let's play that whole line together. Ready, go. And with that exercise, you really do see the purpose behind a lot of the hammer-ons that we play. That's to get some notes that we want to play anyway, of course, but not have to play a pick stroke. Now, that was all just downstrokes. We must immediately introduce the alternate picking, where we're using down and up. Don't forget to check out my alternate picking lesson here on the website. And to do that, we're just going to work with 4 notes at first. So there in measure 5, here are the notes that we're going to play. Again. So if we're counting this, it would be 1 and 2 and. Okay. Now look at measure 6. We're going to do the same type of idea where we're going to hammer on for the first note. But wait a second. What happens to the pick stroke whenever we do the hammer?